So, Michele, I think we'll just get started. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Louise Peterson. I'm the Executive Director for the Outdoor Recreation Council of British Columbia. So we are also the organization that is putting on this webinar today. We usually do monthly webinars. We've taken a little bit of a break, but there's this, and actually there will be a bonus webinar at the end of the month, and I'll just tell you more about that after our presentation here. Yeah, so before introducing Michele, just very quickly, the Outdoor Recreation Council, ORCBC, is a charitable organization. We've got around 70 organizational members, got some individual members too, thank you very much. And our members span the entire spectrum of outdoor recreation user groups, so anything from snowmobiling to hiking to paddling, mountain biking, rock hounding. We've got the naturalists joining us too. So it's a great big tent where you got space to just be yourself. We work to promote and advocate for access and responsible use of BC's outdoors for public recreation. We build bridges between different user groups, and we represent sort of like the broad interests of the organized outdoor recreation community to government and to industry too. And if your organization is not already a member of the ORC, I invite you to join us for sure, or make a donation, because webinars like these are free. And for us to kind of be able to continue to put them on, yeah, we do depend on a strong membership, but also individual donors. So please keep that in mind. And I think that's enough, because I think we've got a lot to cover. I've seen, like, Michele has got a lot of slides, a lot of great content that she wants to present. So yeah, I just want to say I'm super excited about this webinar. I have known Michele Archie for maybe a couple of years now. I was sort of I think I was probably preparing for, a budget submission. And I was kind of looking for, how can we kind of frame, how can we kind of build a really strong case for outdoor recreation and for trails and all the wonderful benefits. And I stumbled upon Harbinger Consultancy. They provide all these fabulous workshops, and they've got some great resources on their website too. And we connected, and we have been collaborating on at least one. It was a workshop, and I think that was like at least a year ago. And I'm just happy to know Michele, and I think you will all be happy at the end of this presentation too. She knows so much about this space that we are active in. So I think without further ado, I just want to thank you all for coming along and giving up, a day of your life, of your day to join us here. So over to you, Michele.
Great. Thanks, Louise. I appreciate it. And hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. And thanks to everybody who will watch this in the future on the YouTube channel or however it gets shared around. The focus today of this webinar is on how trails benefit our local community. So a lot of times what I see is a push to understand the economic impact of trails. In other words, how much money they're bringing in from visitors. And we'll talk very briefly about that. I think that's an important part of the equation, but so is how trails really benefit us, the people who live in these communities. So before we dive into that content, I will just tell you a little bit about myself, and I want to put two little caveats out on the table after that. So one, yes, the slides will be available after the webinar. I think within about 48 hours, you should be seeing that link. So I have worked for over 30 years, primarily in rural community and economic development as a consultant, just doing a really broad range of work with all kinds of organizations that work within and work with small towns and rural communities. And also we've done some work in suburban and urban areas. But for purposes of what we're doing today, I really want to focus on that kind of smaller community, that sort of more typical of British Columbia communities. And a lot of what we'll talk about will translate also to this sort of urban neighborhood and suburban community level as well. I should say that I'm originally from Montana, from just south of Glacier National Park. So kind of familiar with that Rockies area that we share. Louise mentioned that we, through Harbinger, developed and offer online courses for a whole range of these kinds of organizations, from land trusts to trail groups to folks who are working in outdoor recreation, economic development, community leaders, all kinds of professionals. And I'm also the chair of the National Geotourism Council. If you go Google it, you probably won't find our website because we're working on it now. But the council has existed for a number of years, probably about a dozen, more than a dozen years, and it's dedicated to an approach to tourism that's really rooted in communities and what's good for communities, and how tourism can not just benefit communities economically, but can really come from who you are as a community. So the two caveats, one is I'm in a hotel lobby in Melbourne, Australia right now, and that door right there, you may see sort of a revolving cast of characters who have hard hats on. That's normal. There's nothing weird happening with this space, but I'm hoping that they're relatively quiet like that. And then the other thing is that I have a lot of experience with data sources, information sources, and sources of assistance that are US based, much less experience with Canada based. So I'm hoping that one of the things that we can use the chat for is, if you know of resources that are available in Canada or organizations that might be of assistance in Canada, please put them in the chat. And I'd love to have a conversation about what's specifically available in Canada. A lot of the resources that I'm going to offer you in the United States can be applied or adapted in the Canadian context quite easily. So what are we doing today? We're going to focus on how we talk about the value of trails in a way that focuses on how trails benefit our communities. Like I said, there's a lot of data out there about these kind of big picture numbers. I think on the OR CBC website, I saw a study that talked about outdoor recreation having a $15 billion contribution to the provincial economy. So those are great numbers to have and to share, but a lot of times at the community level, that doesn't really mean very much. So we're going to talk about what studies and kind of observation and common sense also tell us about 3 different kinds of community benefits. There are many more, but we're going to focus on 3 kinds. And we're going to also outline some ways that you can demonstrate these for your own trails, no matter where you live. So the first basket of benefits is how trails contribute to quality of life. When you look at research, so economic research and sort of socioeconomic research, there is kind of what I would call a predictable relationship between amenities, quality of life, and economic performance in rural areas. And what I mean by amenity is not that thing that I'm going to go up and find sitting in my hotel shower, the little, shower-sized shampoo and conditioner. But what I'm talking about is an attribute that enhances a location as a place to live or a place to work or a place to start your business. So these attributes, these characteristics are very place specific, although you may share the same types of attributes with other communities. Your particular basket of attributes or amenities in your community is super specific to your place. And the other thing about amenities is usually pretty hard to restore them once you've ruined them. So so let's talk about what that actually means. In my thinking, my way of thinking about this, there are three kind of baskets of amenities for trail communities. One, natural amenities. I think we all know what they are. Scenic beauty, clean air, clean water, wildlife, open space, public lands and protected areas, or areas that are open for recreation, trails, waterways. One that we hear a lot when we talk to rural business leaders is easy access to outdoor recreation. So one of the things, and we'll talk about this in a minute, that motivates people's decisions about where to live is how easy it is to get outside and do the things that they want to do. The second basket is rural character. Is this a good place to raise a family? Does it feel like a friendly small town? Are there social networks? Is there a sense of community, or both community and leave me alone, right? So that sort of balance of, what of the level of community. And yes, you will be able to access the recording later. The question in the chat. So kind of a happy medium of community, not too snoopy, but there when you need them. And then culture and heritage. So that's arts, the creative sector. That's if there was something historically that was interesting about how your place got settled. It could be all kinds of traditions, historic sites and structures, all of that sort of thing. So those three baskets are really important, especially in rural areas, but I think that I found them to be important in larger communities as well, that there's a level of community that you can really connect to that has these good characteristics to it. So 6 ways that these amenities are important. Number one, attracting businesses. So I have done this on a less formal level, the same kind of survey that went into the study of longtime and new business owners around the Yellowstone, the northern part of the Yellowstone National Park region in Montana and Wyoming in the United States. And I've done this similar kind of survey in other places, and the results are remarkably the same in any place that has these kind of natural amenities, that almost always what tops the list when you ask business owners and entrepreneurs why they decided to conduct business in the region, at the top of the list are almost always some natural amenities, scenic beauty, quality of environment, and then we go into that sort of community feeling, good place to raise a family, I want to live in a rural area, there's a small town atmosphere. So almost always those kinds of characteristics outweigh the things that you might typically think, the tax rate, the cost of doing business, the connection to transportation. Not that those things are not important, but these other things rise to the top of the list. In the United States, and I would be really surprised if this were not also the case in your part of Canada, counties that have a lot of access to recreation and recreation assets are growing faster. We're going to talk here in this slide about net migration, which is the difference between the number of people who are moving in and the number of people who are moving out. So across the United States, across the Western United States, at least since 2010, you can see across every kind of county that there's an advantage in terms of attracting residents that recreation counties have over counties that don't have those kinds of recreation resources. And we can have a long conversation about whether this is a good or a bad thing, but notice this in rural areas that non-recreation counties are declining in population while recreation counties are slightly growing in population. In micropolitan, these are the small cities, it's the same pattern. So in my experience having some water under your rudder, right? So having some flow in your economy to work with is better than not having flow in your economy to work with. So loyalty, yes. Loyalty and place attachment, the two things I want to talk about that go hand in hand. So people who live in these places that have these things that they care about tend to be loyal to them. They like living there, they care about their place. One interesting study found that this was there's sort of an order of people's attachment to these amenities. So strongest to natural, then to agricultural, and then to cultural features, sort of in that order. But newer residents tended to value these natural attributes more highly. So you can think about that as sort of your draw for new residents and new business owners. But then over time, people really start to value these deeper aspects of community, what the community culture is like, what the history is. And all of that, we call it attachment to place or place attachment, motivates support for the things that some of you care a lot about, which is land protection, and creates sort of a common ground among different community factions or networks, something that everybody can agree on what's important about our communities. Two other ways of seeing value in these amenities. One is just as the root of community and economic development. And I don't think we have to go too far into that for you to know what that means in your place. So has outdoor recreation become a focus for community and economic development? Has the arts or your cultural heritage become or continue to be a linchpin in your community and economic development strategies? And then the final kind of sort of value is this direct economic impact. So festivals and events, cultural organizations, business incubators, trails, outdoor recreation, historic preservation, all of that sort of thing can have a traceable direct economic impact. So in the past, when I started doing this work a million years ago, the adage was that people follow jobs, that this is why we were seeing this kind of consistent move toward more urbanized life. So people follow jobs, but it is now equally true that jobs follow people. And there's a super interesting study. All of these links should be live when you get the PDF of these slides, or you can just Google the studies. But there's a very interesting study that looked at people who are moving to or within Montana recently, pre-COVID. The data, I believe, are all pre-COVID. So it looked at why they're choosing these places, how satisfied they are once they move there. And the study found sort of three pretty equally sized buckets of people. So about a third of the people who answered this survey were moving for a job. About a third were moving back to where they had lived before. And if you've done any of this work or lived in a rural community for very long, you know that there's a big concern about people moving away, kids moving away and not being able to stay where they live. Well, there is sort of a longer term boomerang effect where kids will move back to where they had lived before. Doesn't happen with everybody, and that's probably good, right? But it's not a small motivation for moving. And then about a third of the people in the study were moving for a better quality of life. So the top 5 reasons for moving.
Michele,
yes.
Sorry, we got a
Yep.
question, a hand up. Do you want to take questions now, or should we just should we wait until the end? Will that kind of break your flow?
Let's wait until the And just so I make sure that I get through all of this.
Yeah.
And is the audio any better than it was? I just saw a question in the chat about the audio. I'll try to speak loudly or clearly and loudly and see if that helps. Hopefully that will help. So the main reasons for moving are to find a desirable natural environment, in other words, better access to the outdoors, to find a less congested place to live, to take advantage of a slower pace of life. So these are all kind of hearkening back to the things that we just talked about, to live in a smaller community and find a safer place to live. I would argue in my observation that all of these became even more important during COVID. When you look at population, migration, and growth patterns, you can see, or at least infer, that all of these became even more important during COVID, and I don't really see any sign of those patterns letting up. So this first characteristic for access to the natural environment fuels entrepreneurial migration, that migration of business owners or people who are going to start businesses. It's a very important characteristic for business owners and entrepreneurs. So as I mentioned, I think COVID actually accelerated some of these trends. So I found in poking around about the situation in Canada, this pretty interesting visual look at trends from moving from provinces. And so it's not very specific, but I think it kind of suggests that there was a movement, people from urban areas to rural areas. And there are other ways that you can look at this through data, but this might be an interesting thing to look for. And larger communities and smaller communities are seeing similar percentage gains. I was just curious about this because I noticed that areas with the highest net increases included both Canada and Kelowna, right around 5.5% growth between 2020 and 2021, when you just take a percentage look at things. So I thought that was kind of interesting, that the growth is not just in smaller cities, it's also in larger cities. And I would be interested in looking at some more rural community data to kind of figure out how that was playing out in smaller communities, because a lot of times smaller communities will actually see a larger percentage population growth. So how can you look at this for yourself? First, your provincial government might have some locally relevant studies, or you might look at universities in your area, especially studies that are related to arts and culture, to community and economic development, looking at particular recreation, amenities and resources, looking at historic preservations. I think I've got a couple of studies later that are BC specific about some of this. Also, planning documents. I've found, at least in the United States, that state and local and regional planning documents often have to collect data that you can then use to sort of bolster your understanding in your case. There is a collection of trail benefit studies on the Headwaters Economics site. Headwaters Economics is Montana-based firm that does a lot of this sort of economic research. So you can look on that site, that you can sort by the type of benefits, type of use, the year, or the region. And these are US regions. I have found a few Canadian studies in this basket. But as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these sort of studies can be pretty easily translated into Canada. So I'll talk in a minute about what you want to look for in the study if you're going to try to apply it or adapt it to your own area. You could do your own business and resident survey, so ask your own questions, explore how people value and what they value about your community, and you can do a similar sort of thing through interviews and focus groups. And I talk about this thing about values language. So how do local people talk about your community, talk about what's important to them? What are their perceptions? And the better you understand that language, even if you've lived there a long time, you can learn a lot by talking to other people with some really specific types of questions. The more you understand that language, the easier it is to connect and talk about how trails fit into that scene. So here's a list of studies that I found pretty interesting to look at for ideas, the sorts of things you can learn if you ask. So model ideas for putting together your own kind of simple study, even if you're not going to look at these as relevant to your area or your community. This is a collection of studies that I think are really good to look at, so you can think about how could we explore this in our own place. And if you need help, there's this really great community toolbox that's just chock full of advice and step-by-step resources, examples, checklists, even PowerPoints for doing a lot of this community-based research. So focus groups, surveys, a really interesting kind of place-based research, participatory research called Photo Voice, and just tons of other ideas. So if you're thinking, we would love to do this in our community, have no idea what we're doing, this is a really great resource, really great place to start. If you want help from somebody who maybe does know a little bit more about putting together studies, in the United States, we have this whole system of cooperative extension. So they're based at universities throughout the country. And I understand that Canada had a sort of an analogous cooperative extension, but maybe about a dozen years ago, it was largely defunded. So this is one thing you could put in the chat. What kind of Canadian organizations have similar capacities? So in the United States, cooperative extension is a big sort of aggregator of information about community and economic development. They offer a lot of assistance, including doing studies and mapping. And so just be curious if you can think of Canadian organizations that have similar capacities. When I was looking around online doing some research for this, I found that there was mention of some provincial or regional planning and organizations or organizations that were involved in natural resource management that might be able to help you out with some level of support. But for now, I want to move to our second basket of community benefits. So this is how trails communicate or contribute to community health. So again, when you look at the research, at least it suggests that there's, again, a predictable relationship between access to recreation facilities like trails and levels of physical activity. And then further, that there's a relationship between levels of physical activity and overall health and healthcare costs. So that's what we want to explore when we look at this particular basket. So that's the angle that we're going to take today. There are other ways of looking at the benefits to community health. So one benefit of trails is specifically that they promote activity among people who don't typically exercise or who hadn't exercised before. So when you put in new trails, it's not just that you're putting in trails for people who are already active outside, hikers or mountain bikers or cross-country skiers or just bicyclists in general, but that you'll pull new people in to exercise who haven't before. So this I thought was an interesting study near Morgantown, West Virginia, that surveyed trail users, found that about a quarter of trail users had not been active before the trail was built. And for most of them, the trail is the only place they exercise. These are rail trails. So they're relatively even terrain. They're either paved or they have a good kind of hard packed trail surface, and they're convenient to where they live. This is an interesting study. That's something that you could replicate in your own communities. We have looked specifically to create this link at a local level between trails, physical activity, and cost savings. This is one study that we've done in Brownsville, Texas, which is very southern United States on the Mexican border. So we know that in Brownsville, Texas, because there was a cohort of people who have been surveyed, there's a public health cohort of people who have been surveyed year after year after year about their health, their level of activity, and so forth. What we were able to do in this study was to take data from that cohort, geolocate the people who live near trails, and figure out what they report about their exercise level. So what we found in Brownsville is that people who live near trails, and in this sort of urban environment, we're looking at about a quarter of a mile away from trails. In rural areas, you can expand that proximity, that's sort of what it means to live near a trail, to be further away. So what we found in Brownsville is that people who live close to trails exercise 22% more than people who don't, and we're looking at moderate levels of moderate exertion. So what we calculated was somewhere between 6 and 12 million in annual cost savings in healthcare costs from construction of this 93-mile trail network. So how do we do that? We looked at proximity and increased physical activity. So we had location-specific data to work with, but if you don't have that for yourself, you can look at other studies that show levels of physical activity increasing with trail access. And typically there's 40 to 50% levels of increase. In Brownsville, I think that there are some cultural reasons why it was less, but we went with the number that we found from the research that we had, and then we connected that with published peer-reviewed studies that estimate the per capita healthcare costs resulting from physical inactivity, and we kind of inverted that, and we said, okay, well, what if we avoided those costs? And that's how we came up with that number. So we took data from the US Census, and we estimated the population that would live within a quarter mile of one of the proposed multiple use trails, and projected a 22% increase in physical activity, and then just applied the healthcare cost savings to that number. So it's a pretty straightforward analysis, and you can do this with yourself with somebody who's good at GIS, and you just look around to find either location-specific data or data from other studies that would help you. And if you want to do something like this for yourself, or if you want to do in other ways to look at the health benefits of trail use or outdoor recreation, one place to look is for schools of public health, or often local or regional public health offices will be able to help you look for whether there is that kind of cohort, the data that's collected over time. Local and county health departments sometimes keep this kind of information. If you're looking more broadly, you can go back to that Headwaters Economics Library of Trail Benefits studies. And I'll just tell you, I look at other studies all the time, and I would encourage you to do this too, not just looking for data that you might be able to apply in your community, but also looking for ideas for, well, how can we study this in our own community? So sometimes these studies will be seem really complicated and have a lot of academic language around them, but ultimately what they're doing is pretty simple and straightforward, and you can adapt it to your place. So if you're looking at studies from other places that you want to apply to this kind of analysis, I'd say 3 things. Pick studies from situations that are similar to yours. So if you're in an urban area, rural area studies are not likely to be as applicable as studies from other relatively similar size urban areas. If you're in the mountains and you know you've got a lot of kind of specific types of trails and outdoor recreation available, you can look for studies that are in similar kinds of geographical areas with that same kind of similar sort of mix of amenities. Pick data sources that are close to home if you can. So it's in part because they'll be more applicable to your place, but also in part because they'll be more believable to the people that you're speaking with. And then make sure that they have the data that you're missing. So if you're trying to do a study and you're missing that critical level of data about physical activity levels among residents near trails, and make sure that the studies that you're looking at have that information. So a couple of close to home studies that I found that might be interesting from this health standpoint are on this page. One of them, the first one, includes a step-by-step. You can just look at this and kind of pick what you're interested in. It's a whole page of like calculations and where we found the data that could be interesting to look at from this standpoint if you're looking to do something similar in your community. And then also communities in health and living landscapes. This was a student's kind of honors thesis that looked at how and how much and participation in outdoor recreation was in 2 rural communities in northern British Columbia, and then also barriers and benefits. And so this was a slice of a larger study, but interesting to look at if you're thinking about replicating this. And then the last set of benefits for local communities is the contribution of trails to the growth and success of local businesses. So we know, because we've already covered this and research has covered this, and I think if you just ask around, you can demonstrate for yourself that trails can affect decisions about business location, they can affect decisions about business expansion, and about the formation of new businesses, whether they're specifically outdoor recreation related or whether they're formed where they're formed, or expanded where they're expanded, or located where they're located because of trails, because of recreation. So you can see this particularly clearly in communities that have consciously decided to leverage their proximity to trails or to create trails or trail connections for themselves. So you may be familiar with trail town programs. You may have seen this different places in Canada or the United States that are designed specifically to help create that leverage, to help enhance community vitality, local business, economic vitality by connecting really directly businesses to trails and trail users to businesses. So bike-friendly business programs are like that. They're sort of trail town programs for bikes. If you want to look at how you understand this in numbers, what I've found is that long distance trails and bigger trail networks either are the most studied, so this is what you're going to find a lot of studies about, are these larger long distance trails and trail networks. Not saying that there aren't for smaller trails or shorter trails or small trail networks, but I think that there just are a lot of studies out about these kind of long distance trails and bigger trail networks. And there's a logic to why you might see a larger effect from these long distance trails and trail networks. It's because there's more to do along the trail or along the trail network. They tend to foster repeat visitation. They tend to kind of draw people who say, we visited this part and now we want to do the whole trail, or we visited this network and there's always a lot of different types of trails to ride, different communities to connect with. So this is a study that looked at the Great Allegheny Passage in the United States, in the eastern part of the country, 150 miles of primarily rail trail that runs across 2 states. So what this study looked at were business openings, like net business openings. How many new trail-related businesses opened in these communities along the trail versus how many closed. So a net gain of 65 new businesses in less than 10 years. 2007 was the start of this Trail Town program that was focused on creating new businesses and supporting existing businesses. In addition, 25 businesses expanded operations, 15 changed hands, and you can see this upward curve of sales related to trail traffic. And you can also see that if you look on this graph, that in the trail's impact zones, so in those communities nearby the trail, they have generally experienced a lot more success in terms of trail sector employment and a really strong level of success in total employment, even as these communities were losing population. So it's one way of looking at the success of trails. So smaller trail networks also yield these business benefits, but you just might have to do your own digging to find them. So when we did the research for the study that we did in Brownsville, we talked to a lot of business owners, and by talking to business owners, you find out what their story is. How did you start? Why did you locate where you located? So this particular bicycle and coffee shop did some market research before they opened. They started as a weekend pop-up in a park near a trailhead, close to just a 10-mile multiple use path. And what they found is there's a lot of call on the part of trail users for coffee. And so they decided to locate near the trailhead. So what I see when we work in smaller communities is that there's sort of an if you build it, they will come effect for trails. So if you build a trail network, it's going to get some use. It's going to have some benefit for your local businesses. But what really ups the leverage and ups the ante and the returns is deciding to focus on specific types of business growth that go hand in hand with your trails. So Perry, New York is part of a very new Trail Town initiative in Western New York, but the eastern part of the United States. And what they've done over time is to focus first on improving their downtown so that they were ready to focus on business growth, including encouraging community investment in downtown buildings. So this Main Street LLC is a model for how to do that. And then once they were ready to focus on business growth, they took advantage of data that came out of a 2017 visitor survey that they did in conjunction with a couple of other nearby villages, and took the kinds of businesses that visitors wanted to see to heart. So they noticed when we asked local businesses or visitors what improvements were needed, the first thing they said were store hours that match when visitors were around. And the second thing they said was local food, hike and walk maps, cultural events, and accommodations. So loud and clear, Perry heard that people wanted more local food establishments and more interesting accommodations. And so since 2017, these are the businesses that are sort of related or kind of would be interesting to trail users that were started. And you can see that they focused on local food and accommodations, in addition some specialty retail, and there's one kind of visitor experience thing. So how this happens is not cookie cutter. Personal relationships, creating kind of a welcoming community of entrepreneurs. This woman, Jill, who owns this meat company that sells meat from her family's dairy cows, which is not the typical source of beef, is really supportive. She started as a pop-up at a farmer's market, and then she now really supports other small businesses by giving them space in her now retail store in downtown Perry to kind of help them test out their business ideas. So this digital Main Street resource is Canadian. I believe it's in Ontario, focused on providing digital resources for Main Street type of businesses. So there are a couple of resources here that you might want to look at. So I will say that this whole pathway to having local businesses benefit from trails is a journey. The more thoughtful you are about it, the more you are specifically trying to do this in your community, the faster you get these benefits. But even if your road is a little more winding and less direct, that over time, I think you will see benefits for local businesses. So I had a conversation last year with John Cohen, who is the commerce president in the small community of Ottawa, Kansas, who told me that their first question was just, how do we get people in Ottawa outside and exercising more? So that led them to focus on these 2 rail trails that ultimately were developed that cross in their community. So they started this idea of in-town trail development with this focus on local people. And then they noticed that families weren't really spending a lot of time on the trails, so they developed these different pocket parks along the trails. They're differently themed, and so kids will ask, can we go to this park or that park, giving families an option to have a little place to play with the kids that's right off the trail. And then they noticed that the teenagers don't like to hang out with their parents, so they built a teen park along the trail. And then they connected their in-town trails to these longer linear trails, these 2 rail trails that cross in town. And then they started noticing that there was this local business development, that new businesses were starting. And one of the things that they didn't expect that was when they really started looking at this, that there were all kinds of new bed and breakfasts and Airbnbs that were located near the trail that specifically marketed to users. And now they're seeing that there are a lot of other kinds of businesses that are looking to locate near the trail, even like car dealerships that want to specifically locate near the trail. So these benefits can accrue over time. If you want to explore this for your own community, one thing to pay attention to is how your downtowns and business districts are changing. So this is a kind of a list of things that you might want to look at. Again, in my experience, the things that we look at, what's measured improves. And so if you start looking at these things and focusing attention there, it kind of draws the attention of your community to what you're trying to accomplish. Tracking municipal health over time, so value of capital assets, total property valuation. I don't want to go through this whole list because I want to leave a little bit of time for questions. Or you could also do a downtown market and business district analysis. This is a fantastic do-it-yourself resource for doing what a lot of people, or a lot of communities will save a lot of money for, or invest a lot of money in having a marketing firm do this for you. This is a really great community engaged do-it-yourself tool. I like that tool a lot. Again, you can go back to the Headwaters economic studies to look at studies of trail usage, impact, planning studies. The Kansas Community Toolbox is a great resource. And I've also found a lot of municipal officials tend to track some of these variables themselves, even if not officially, they'll do it kind of informally. Main Street Groups, Chambers of Commerce gives you direct connections to the visitors community, or the business community. I also like this model of recruiting business owners to do some of this research for you. Super simple, just find some business owners who are willing to play, give them a couple of questions that they're going to ask their customers, not this whole list of questions, a couple of questions that they're going to ask their customers to learn more about visitors, learn more about their customers, learn more about the relationship of their business and their customers to your local trails, et cetera. And then get together quarterly or a couple times a year with these business owners and just talk about what they're finding. So about those visitors, they are on many trails. Local users are often 75 to 90% or even more of trail users, but that littler fraction of outdoor or out of town users can make a big difference for local businesses and also for the kinds of services that are available to local residents. So on the Whitefish Trail in northwestern Montana, for example, there are about 30% of the total use, 22,000 annual uses by visitors, generates 3.6 million in spending and supports 68 local jobs, which isn't bad for a relatively short trail in a small city in Montana. I think Whitefish is somewhere around 5,000 people. I just want to flag, when you look at economic impact analysis, that all economic impact analysis looks only at the money that comes in from visitors. So how many dollars you attract from outside your area and how much does that new money benefit your place. There's another way to do impact analysis, which is to look at economic significance. So that's the spending of all visitors and how much economic activity it supports. This is something to think about if you're thinking about doing an economic study of your trails and trail visitors, whether you want to capture local spending as well. That's a bigger conversation. It's something we go into in our courses. So how can you explore this for your own community? Again, ask business owners. And you can go to this Great Allegheny Passage Economic Impact Study to get ideas of what to ask. This can be an informal thing, or it can be a formal sort of survey. So anytime that you're delving into this realm of looking at what's going on in your communities and with your trail, I say three things. One, keep an open mind. You might be right about what you're going to learn, but you're probably don't just build your research to confirm what you think you want to hear. Build your research to find out what's actually going on. Create your messaging built on the facts, not on what you want the facts to be, and study to learn. So a lot of economic studies are done to advocate for trails, but I find that you can learn a lot that might help you, say, fine-tune your programs or identify issues that you didn't know were issues, or understand these issues better, or ask me questions. So if you're going to do this kind of work, just go into it knowing that you're there to learn. So this is a list of other things that you can explore and explain, other benefits for local communities. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but these are some other things that you can specifically look at and explore. So before I wrap up and leave about 5 minutes for questions, I just wanted to point out that we do, as we said, offer courses and workshops. All of these courses are online. So our whole schedule of 2023 courses is on our website right now. Louise has put this code out, the ORCBC code typically will offer a 10% discount. But for the next week and a half or so, this ORCBC webinar code will give you a 20% discount on all of our courses. So I just pulled a few that are particularly relevant to the kinds of work that you're doing with trails. So there's a course about trail-related community and economic development, or more broadly about outdoor recreation and economic and community development. There's a course about how to do trail user research, and then there's one about how to tell your own economic story without hiring economists. So that's my email address, and I really do mean it. I'd love to hear from you afterwards. So Louise, let's just take a few questions, and I'm happy to stay on a little bit after if people have time.
Thank you, Michele. It was excellent. Lots of content to cover in a very short time, which is why, there's probably going to be people here who will sign up for your courses. So there are a few questions that have come in. This is low here. Carol, great info. Do you have any information on inclusion and value of equestrian trails and multi-use sharing?
Yeah, so if you look at the Headwaters resource library, there are some studies in there that specifically look at equestrian trails and at multi-use trails. So also, one of the things that I've found in doing this kind of study is you learn about how well your users are getting along, because as soon as you start talking to trail users, you find out, do we have a good way of kind of coordinating our multiple use, or do we need to do some more work on that? Do we need to do some more education, some more signage, some more kind of direct work with our different user groups? So I would go to the Headwaters library as a first stop.
Yeah, great. What I would also say is that the ORC has, we've collated lots of different studies from BC, and along with the slides, the recording, and a few other resources, I'll make sure I share a link to that folder as well. But it's really incomplete. I really feel that in many ways, kind of, Michele, you definitely kind of what you are showing here is that in the US, there's just been a lot more ongoing research on the benefits, economic impact of outdoor recreation. It's not just all trails, I should say that. And actually kind of, I think what you presented here today, Michele, too, it's really applicable to really any type of recreation asset. It's not just trails, but really could be a good fishing lake or
right.
ski
oh, that's
hill.
True.
We do have a question here from Kim Bernard. We're looking to host an online wayfinding story map project for our area. This is Shawnigan Lake, especially for favorite trails and outdoor features and refreshment stops to support hikers and cyclists and outdoor recreation in general. Do you know of any good examples of this? So they're based in Shawnigan Lake, which is on Vancouver Island. Story map.
Kim, and I think what I'd like to do with that is, Louise, let me send you some links, some examples that we can send out to everyone when you follow up with, when you send out the link to the slides and the video, but I think that there are some really great examples to look at.
That's great. Oh, Martin. What did Martin say? I'll just put this up again. Would you recommend using
mobile?
Yeah.
Yep. I see the question. To recommend using mobile data analytics to understand trail user volumes and differentiate between local users and visitors. Martin, I think, thank you for bringing that up. I didn't talk about sort of big data. So again, if you go to the Headwaters site, they have a very interesting and helpful analysis of kind of the pros and cons and how-tos of using mobile data. And I think that that's a good resource, a good way to get started. I do think it can be a good part of the picture, and especially if you find it difficult to do an in-depth kind of trail user survey and study. The big data can help you. It typically needs to be, or it's helpful typically if it's ground truth. So even if you can't do a big trail user survey, it will be helpful if you can parallel the big data with some kind of more confined user research to ground truth it.
Okay, that's great. And I know Martin might be in touch with you because Martin is hoping to do a nice big project. I don't see any other questions, and I think we are sort of getting close to the end.
Well, I did see a question. Has anyone ever built a trailer and found it had no benefit? I do not think that anybody has ever studied a trail and found that it had no benefit, but I do know that a lot of studies are done where they find less or different benefits than they thought going in. I'm pretty sure it also has happened that somebody has built a trail and it's had very little benefit or impact.
There was a question from Liz. It was like maybe an hour ago or like 45 minutes ago. She was asking, what's the impact on tourism? On tourism, off tourism? That might have been covered already.
The impact of trails on tourism?
Yeah, what's the impact of trails on tourism?
So, well, that could be a whole webinar in itself. But I think very quickly, I would just say this, that the slide that said, if you build it, they will come, doesn't always hold true for trails is true. That the answer about the impact on tourism depends on a lot of things. It depends on the trail type, trail location, level of trail maintenance. It depends on where your community is. It depends on whether you have visitors or not. It depends on whether community visitors can find the trail and know about it, whether trail visitors can find your community and know about it. So there are a lot of variables, I would say, in the impact on tourism. And beyond that, Liz, feel free to email or call me if we can talk more. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's one from Warren here in Thunder Bay, Ontario. What are some techniques for doing trail use counts that you've seen, Michele?
Okay, again, a whole webinar or course. We actually do a course on this. So there are automatic counters of various kinds. And then back to the equestrian question, some of those will count horses and some will not. Some are magnetic, so they only count like vehicles. So be careful what kind of counter you get. Make sure that it's going to work in your situation. I've also seen organizations station people near trails and just do a trail user count. And you would have to do that multiple times in order to get a good sample, and you can extrapolate from that sample. I have seen organizations do, this is a little less reliable, but I have seen organizations do basically trailhead surveys where you're looking at the number of cars at a trailhead at different times. And In both of those cases in all cases, I think it's always a good idea if you're going to be counting people to also try to get a sense of where they're from. So with license plates, that can be sometimes accomplished. And with people stationed near a trail doing a count, a physical count. I love this, just shout out, what's your zip code or what's your postal code kind of thing, or where are you from, and then writing that down at the same time. That can be a really easy way to at least get a sense of where your trail usually comes from. Those are kind of the main ways, plus big data, so cell data.
Yeah. Well, who knows? Like maybe we will do something just on that, on doing doing one on trail surveys. So watch the space. We got just maybe this is going to be the last one. It's another one from Doug. They are doing some fundraising. They want to do some fundraising to add to government grants for completed pathway design. What are good words to use to encourage people to donate as part of the public component to funding?
So it's one of the reasons why focusing, if you go back to the list of potential community benefits that we covered in this webinar, including the list at the end, but the ones that we drilled into in detail, and then the list at the end, a lot of local appeals are tied to those kind of benefits. So I guess I would also say that you could use some of those interviews and focus groups, even just get together a small group of local people who might be the kind of people that you might see contributing to that sort of public funding component, and then ask them, talk to them about pathways and trails, and find out how, what do these benefits seem of particular interest to them, and sort of use that as a kind of informal market research.
It's great. Thank you, Michele. I think we should probably we should stop now, because I think people are leaving to kind of head back to work or go outside for a nice walk in the sunshine. So thank you so much, Michele. This has been super valuable. There's lots of things from different people here, like hands clapping. So thank you, Michele, for giving up your time to present us to us today. So as I said before, in the next day, I'll send you Michele's slides. I'll send you the recording, some links. Michele, I think you said you've got a few additional things you want to send, and feel free to email me back, all of you, if you've got suggestions for maybe follow-up webinars that you would like us to do, or real kind of workshops. We're always really interested in working with Michele. We would also love to kind of foster BC talent. So if you know of workshops that are like this, we don't know about it. That's why I keep on kind of going back to Michele, because I'm just not aware of this sort of thing here in BC. But let us know, and the same about studies that we may not have know about. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Michele, and see you next time.
All right. Thanks, everyone.